Good evening. Welcome everyone to a very special Church in the 21st Century program, and thank you all for being here tonight. I have to be honest, I'm feeling a little bit guilty and responsible for the weather. I was sharing with my panelists a minute ago that I spent, I hate to admit it, several hours yesterday hand watering my lawn. So I think I may be the cause of the rain today, although goodness knows we need it. But thank you for venturing out in the weather. I'm Kathleen McGillicuddy, a Boston College trustee and the founding co-chair of the Council for Women of Boston College. Council for Women, along with the Church in the 21st Century, is the sponsor of this evening's program, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Our program tonight is entitled Why Women Choose to Stay. And judging from this great turnout, I'm not at all surprised that we have such a great interest in this topic. I would also imagine that most of you have considered this question yourselves over the last several years. We don't need. I'm actually also confident that you'll find our speaker this evening and our great panel more than up to the challenge of wrestling with this complex topic. You're actually going to have the privilege tonight of hearing from four very strong women who are passionate about their faith and passionate about the church. And I also can in advance promise you that their remarks are neither prescripted nor necessarily politically correct. So if you joined us this evening to hear and share unvarnished views, you'll not be disappointed. So everybody can stay. Before we start, I'd like to actually just make a quick comment on the Council for Women of Boston College. Council was actually formed a little over 2 years ago, and it has a very clear and simple and important mission. Council is dedicated, and I'll quote from a mission, to furthering the role of women as leaders and active participants in the university. We seek to help the future of the university, we seek to have a strong voice, and we seek to play an important role, all in support of the university's overall mission. The council actually came into existence because Boston College recognized the need to engage more of its women alums. It might come as a surprise to even some of you who are close to the university that the living alumni of BC is now over 50% women. We've all been long comfortable, or cognizant anyhow, with the fact that the student body is over 50% women, but the alumni base is now over 50% women, and that's a very important fact for the university. Council itself sponsors numerous programs, such as this evening's, and it's really designed to reach and engage women alums, and importantly, students as well, female students, who will, after all, be the leaders, alumni leaders of tomorrow. And in our role, the council keeps what I call a special dedicated eye, seeking to provide forums to listen to women's needs, issues, and interests, and we're really honored to be proud to be sponsoring this evening's event. Thank you all again for being here. Tonight's program is but one of many, obviously, offered by Church in the 21st Century on a monthly basis. For those of you who might not be familiar with Church in the 21st Century, or C21, it was launched actually by Boston College President Father William Leahy in the fall of 2002. It was really originally designed to be a 2-year program to assist the church in dealing with some of the issues related to the sexual abuse scandal, and really also to help the church envision a course for renewal. What started out as a 2-year effort really met with great acclaim and great success, and it has now been established as a permanent center here on campus this past fall, and the newly installed director of Church in the 21st Century, Tim Muldoon, who just started, is here with us this evening. One of the most popular conferences that C21 sponsored was entitled Envisioning the Church Women Want, and I think a lot of you here this evening participated in that sold-out event. It was actually held in April of '04. It brought together over 600 Catholic men and women of very diverse experiences, interests, and ages who really tried to explore the future role of women in the church. Tonight, the Council for Women really has the honor to continue C21's focus on the future of women in the church by asking our keynote speaker and the women of this panel the very clear yet profoundly difficult question of why they choose to stay with the church, why they choose to remain Catholic, and what that staying with the church and remaining Catholic means to them. So what do we really hope to accomplish this evening? What do we hope that you, our attentive audience, will take home with you? If I look back just a little, the Second Vatican Council described the church as the people of God. And dogma from Vatican II said that we, the laity, along with the hierarchy, have a special, and I quote very loosely here, have a special mission to fulfill Christ's prophetic office as his witnesses because we, the laity, have a special understanding of the faith. So our purpose tonight really is to take our special understanding, our personal understanding of the faith, and speak it here in this auditorium as the voice of the church. We have a renowned keynote speaker this evening and a panel chosen very carefully to bring forth variant perspectives. Our panel includes a business executive, a student, and a theologian. So our goal this evening is really to open the dialogue broadly through the words of these four women, their personal passion, and their diverse perspectives. But in so doing, we realize that no single program can truly uncover and discuss the complexity of the question we're posing. Tonight, we will really try to continue the dialogue started in previous C21 programs and speak our faith. But it really shouldn't end here, and I'm delighted to be able to say that C21 office plans to provide some very special opportunities for continuing this discussion beyond this evening. I'll share some of those details at the end of the program. So that's our objectives here this evening, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you as well. A few words on logistics. Alice McDermott will speak first, followed by each one of our three panelists. Each of them will share their struggle to recognize faith and reality as they stay with the church. They'll also reflect a little on what their experiences might mean for the next generation of Catholic women, obviously an important focus for all of us. We also want to hear from you. We've provided question cards, I believe, should have been on your seats, and we ask you to be thinking of your questions as each of the speaker and panelists are talking. We'll address as many questions as we possibly can after the panelists are finished. Additional cards will be available, so don't be shy, and you can ask more than one question. We may not get to all of them, and we'll be collecting the cards throughout when the speakers are speaking. So listen carefully, and please take the opportunity to share some of your thoughts and questions with us. So before we introduce the panel, just a few people in the audience tonight I'd like to just take a second to recognize. There are actually, I think, just under 20 members of the Council for Women of Boston College. I would love it if you introduce yourselves to them in our reception afterwards. They'll be wearing special name tags. We also have here with us this evening Father Bill Neenan, Vice President and Special Assistant to the President. Father, thank you for being here. I believe Jim Husson, Vice President for University Advancement. Thank you, Jim, as well. Susan Gallagher, President of the BC Alumni Association. And I mentioned already Tim Muldoon, newly installed Director of the Center for Church in the 21st Century. So we appreciate your support this evening. Now let me introduce our fabulous keynote speaker who was kind enough to join us here this evening. Alice McDermott is author of 5 widely acclaimed novels, including her most recent, Child of My Heart. Her 4th novel, Charming Billy, won the 1998 National Book Award and the Before Columbus Foundation Award. Her 2nd novel, That Night, was actually a finalist for the National Book Award, as well as the Pulitzer Prize, among many other awards. Alice was born in Brooklyn, New York, grew up in an Irish Catholic family in suburban Long Island. I think we might have known each other, Alice, and earned a BA degree from the State University at Oswego, State University of New York at Oswego, and an MA from the University of New Hampshire. Alice actually published her first novel in 1982. Her 3rd novel, At Weddings and Wakes, also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, was published in 1992, the very same year that her second one that night was released in film version for Warner Brothers, so we have a star among us. Alice is currently the Richard A. Maxey Professor in Writing Seminars at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. She lives in Bethesda, Maryland, with her husband and 3 children. And it is with great pleasure and immense gratitude for your participation this evening that I introduce Alice. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you very much for having me here. Some of my colleagues at Hopkins, when I told them what I was doing this evening, made some jokes about preaching to the choir. But when I saw the list of all of you who were going to be here and saw the distinct bias in the surnames, I figured I probably am preaching to relatives. It's humbling, to say the least, to begin this discussion. And I could stop right now, since Kathleen has already declared my talk fabulous. But I will say, as a preliminary, that I am looking forward to hearing all your voices tonight and certainly on into the future. Why women choose to stay. This is a preface. I could no more stop being Catholic than I could stop being a native New Yorker or of Irish descent, my parents' child, or my children's mother. Being Catholic is a condition of my being. It might as well be genetic. Catholicism is my faith, my culture, my heritage. The church is my social community and my spiritual sanctuary. It is the source of the very language with which I contemplate life and death, give thanks, seek comfort, define and comprehend the substance of things hoped for. To leave this church for another, less sexist, less maddening religious institution would save me a lot of anguish, but also place me in what would feel like a permanent state of exile. There would be, for the rest of my days, a lingering disappointment, a loss of authenticity, a sense of failure. The failure of my love for the church, as well as the failure of the church itself to hear the voices of those who love it. Simply put, women choose to stay because we love our church, because it is and will always be our church. But to say we cannot leave does not eliminate our anguish as we stay. Rather, it is our longing to stay in the church that makes our appeals for change all the more urgent. It is our full understanding of how losing the church would diminish us that fuels our passion for its reform. I, and many of us, I believe, are determined that we will not leave the Catholic Church. What I and many of us fear, I believe, is that the Catholic Church will leave us. So why do women stay? Nearly 20 years ago, when I was first being tagged as a somewhat public Catholic, the question came up in a telephone interview with a reporter for a New York newspaper. It was couched in the usual terms: as a feminist, as a thinking person, as a modern person, how can you remain a practicing Catholic in light of your church's archaic and oppressive attitude toward women? My impulse then was to look for a metaphor the poor guy could comprehend. An impulse, by the way, he attributed to my career as a fiction writer, but one that I attribute to my life as a Catholic. Consider how often Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like. The reporter had already told me that we shared similar backgrounds, Brooklyn-born, second-generation Irish Americans. So I told him that for us Catholic women, the hierarchy of our church was sometimes like a dearly loved old Irish uncle or father, grandfather, or family friend. One of those smart, witty, generous types who have loved you since your birth, who would give whatever he had to ensure your welfare, who throughout your life was there to comfort you in distress and to rejoice with you in your triumphs, to offer counsel, wisdom, the occasional $20. A man you love with all your heart, who loves you with all his heart, but who will, on occasion, say kike, or wop, or chink, or expound on the inferior intelligence of women, or blacks, or the non-Irish in general. A thoroughly good and generous man with a maddening streak of bigotry that you can only attribute to the limitations of his own particular history and culture. A thoroughly good and generous man who nevertheless, on occasion, when he opens his mouth, makes you roll your eyes in dismay or close them in despair. When the church defends its position on the ordination of women, I told the reporter, the Catholic women I know roll their eyes, sometimes just close them in despair. We are embarrassed by the bigotry, the contorted theology, the simplistic justifications. We wish it were otherwise, but we still love the old dear. We see him as better than his flaws. We tolerate, we even forgive, because we love him and the essential part he has had in our lives. The reporter and I laughed about the metaphor. He did indeed have just such a beloved, bigoted uncle. I felt myself cleared of all charges of being either a phony feminist or a timid Catholic woman content in my oppression. I was neither stupid nor self-hating. I was simply, as so many women are, benignly tolerant of the foibles of certain beloved men. Benign tolerance. That's how many of the practicing Catholic women I know view our church's attitude towards us. A benign tolerance of what is, after all, only historical, cultural, institutionalized bigotry. I'll leave it to others here, far more well-versed in church doctrine than I am, to parse the church's official reasoning regarding its failure to ordain women. But for most of us out there in the pew, in the schools, in the midst of Catholic families, of our Catholic lives, much of it sounds like the rationale of bigots. Yes, sure, there were no women at the Last Supper. There were no Irishmen either, but that hasn't stopped them from becoming priests. There were, in fact, only Jewish men at the Last Supper. There was at least one married man at the Last Supper. I'm pretty sure there was no one over 60 at the Last Supper. Why do these facts have no bearing on the requirements for the priesthood? Why only gender? What is it but bigotry that would bar Elizabeth Seton, Flannery O'Connor, Dorothy Day, Teresa of Avila, the very woman who said, "My soul doth magnify the Lord," from delivering a sermon at a Sunday morning mass simply because of her sex? What is it but bigotry that claims that we Catholics, who can see full humanity, body and soul, in a collection of embryonic cells, can't see Christ in the figure of a woman on the altar? That we Catholics, who can see, as Mother Teresa saw, the face of Christ in the poorest of the poor, would scratch our heads in dismay and revert to paganism at the sight of a woman consecrating the Eucharist? What is it but bigotry that claims that we who are one body in that bread are nevertheless irreversibly divided, male and female, and the female is forever the lesser of the two? It's bigotry, and we Catholic women know it. We roll our eyes or close them in frustration and shame or in benign tolerance. We shake our heads at each other, Catholic women young and old, over the intransigence of our church, even as we hold fundraisers and plan liturgies, raise Catholic children, run Catholic schools, dedicate our spring breaks, our summers, our youth, our lives to the care of the sick, the elderly, the poorest of the poor, to prayer and sacrifice, to our church itself. A few years ago, when my daughter was in 5th grade, her teacher, Sister Nina, asked the class how many sacraments there were, and my daughter offered the reply, 6 for women, 7 for men. She didn't get that from me. She didn't hear it at home, I promise. Now, Sister Nina has been teaching Catholic school children for somewhere between 300 and 400 years. And it was with some sense of dread that I asked my daughter, as she relayed the tale, how Sister Nina had replied. She laughed, my daughter told me. She laughed and said, "You're right about that." Later, I corroborated the story with Sister Nina herself. She was right, she said. This woman who had given her youth, her middle age, and now her old age to the church. Sister Nina would love to retire from teaching, but her order needs her salary. No matter how you look at it, she said, there are 7 for men and 6 for women. It's the truth. Benign tolerance. We women are good at it. We practice it in offices and on committees, with troublesome neighbors and elderly parents, with children, of course, and boyfriends, and perhaps most universally, spouses. We are particularly good at it when it comes to the men we love. We roll our eyes, we shrug, oh, that's just him. We keep the peace, we play along, we seldom weigh the cost. Another metaphor comes to mind, this one anecdotal. Some years ago, I spent a few months as a writer in residence at a small college in the South. One of my colleagues there was a charming, brilliant woman who taught literature part-time. Although she was 20 years older than I was at the time, we too shared a similar background. She was Chicago Irish Catholic, and similar opinions about literature and politics and life in general. Her husband was a Southern lawyer, also charming and intelligent, a marvelous storyteller with an encyclopedic mind for the region and its history. They invited me to join them one evening for a cocktail reception, a fundraiser for an artists group. And as we pulled onto the estate where the fundraiser was held, a parking attendant flagged us down and then leaned into the car to explain where we were to park. My friend's husband listened politely to the man and then thanked him generously. And then, just as we were pulling away, rolled up his window and declared jovially, "Well, there was one dumb nigger." Sitting behind her in the car, I saw my friend flinch. And then she turned and looked at me and rolled her eyes. Later, she explained that her husband, who had many dear black friends, who had great respect for black people in general, simply could not shake the habit, the tradition, the heritage of racism, much as she wished he would. He was a good man with a blind spot, a flaw. In a conspiracy of benign tolerance, she clearly loved her husband, and actually I liked him too. I assured her I understood. And yet, no one who knows the history of the South, the legacy of racism's cruelty and injustice, one that haunts and diminishes this country still, could argue that such racism is anything but a grave moral error, or that benign tolerance in this regard seems a moral error as well. Excuse me. How then is it different for Catholic women and our church? The scandal that as the press likes to say, rocked the Catholic Church, was a lesson for all of us in the insidious nature of our own benign tolerance. Suddenly, the bigotry that is at the heart of the institution of the priesthood of our church was not something to be dismissed as inevitable, to be excused in favor of a focus on the church's good intentions, to be tolerated as a comfortable tradition. The bigotry that divides humanity in two and makes one half worthy of full participation in the life of the church and the other less than worthy is the very foundation of the logic that allows a priest's reputation to take precedent over a child's pain, that allows a parent's outrage to be dismissed in favor of the institution's good name. A church that can deny any individual full participation in its life, in its sacraments, in the liturgy at its center, because of gender alone, has already set the logical groundwork for a denial of any individual's voice on the basis of age or nationality or status in the community. It is an institution whose moral authority is already compromised by hypocrisy. It is a church with a fatal moral flaw. There is bigotry at the heart of the institution of the priesthood of our church, sexual bigotry. This is not a matter for benign tolerance. Much as we who love the church, who do not want to, as the Pope has said, give rise to antagonism, wish it were so. It is a matter of grave moral error. It is the crack in the foundation of the institution of the church that may well bring it down. The failure to ordain women may well bring the church down. Not merely because of its practical implications, not merely because we are a sacramental people and the current dire shortage of male priests threatens the dissemination of the sacraments, but because it is simply morally wrong to deny fully half the population of our church their full participation. Because it is morally wrong to let cultural tradition, the hunger for power, simple fear, keep our church, our priesthood, from the full realization of Christ's word. Because we would be a better church, a better people, a stronger force in the world if we let go of our bigotry. And I don't want to skip lightly over that last consideration, a stronger force in the world. We are a country at war. We are a country where the divide between the rich and poor steadily grows wider. The Johns Hopkins School of Public Health estimates that at least 100,000 Iraqi civilians have been killed in this war. Hurricane Katrina served to show us what the divide between rich and poor really means. In the cacophony of voices that is our public discourse, I listen for the voice of my church. I hear it raised in a discussion regarding whether certain political candidates should receive the Eucharist. Then mostly silence. Mostly silence about the morality of this war. Silence about the scandal of the infant mortality rate and the teenage mortality rate in our inner cities. Silence in the public forum, and even silence from the pulpit, where in more than one Catholic church over the past 3 years, I have heard the prayer for vocations to the priesthood repeated more frequently and with more elaboration than prayers for justice or peace or the poor. Can it be, as Father Andrew Greeley has said, that the priest scandal has deprived the hierarchy of its moral authority? Or has the fundamental moral error of our church's attitude toward women, far more long-standing than that scandal, deprived the church not only of priests, but of moral vigor? We all pray for vocations, but some of us pray knowing there are great priests waiting to serve our church. Brilliant, compassionate, saintly priests, marvelous teachers, excellent administrators, gifted preachers waiting to serve our church and to help to restore our maligned priesthood. I have read that Mother Teresa, in her humility, never aspired to the sacrament of holy orders, never thought to be elevated to the priesthood. But how often it has occurred to me, especially in the dire hours of our priest scandal, how Mother Teresa might have elevated our priesthood. Every summer, I spend 2 weeks at a writers' conference at the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. Sewanee is an Episcopal university, and every Sunday I am there, I go to the Episcopal service in the lovely Gothic chapel. Over the years, the tall and gangly pastor has been joined by a diminutive associate, a woman. I have been moved by her sermons as well as his. I have taken communion from her hands as well as his. I have attended with my children, all Catholic school educated, who do not scratch their heads in dismay or laugh at a woman in liturgical robes or seem in the least bit puzzled by her role as priest. I have looked around the church to see congregants of all ages, many of whom surely have spent the greater part of their religious lives in a church whose priesthood was limited to men, and some others as well who have been baptized by this woman and will never think of the priesthood as either male or female. They all seem to be well and thriving. These services have not filled me with a longing to bolt. Although there is a colleague at the university who tells me every summer in a slow southern drawl, the Episcopal Church is waiting to welcome you with open arms. I am, as I said, irreversibly Catholic, but they do fill me with hope. My church can do this, I think. My church, our Roman Catholic Church can do this. We can suffer the change in our outdated and immoral tradition. We can put aside 2 centuries of bigotry. We can be neither male nor female in Christ. We can do this. If only Rome will open the door, find the compassion to hear us. If only we can find the courage to persist in our appeals. And then another metaphor for women and our church comes to mind. The women in the Catholic Church are like the Canaanite woman who asked Jesus to heal her daughter. At first, Jesus said not a word to the woman, and as she persisted in her request, his apostles asked that he send her away. She was making so much noise. Instead, Jesus turned to the woman and said that he had been sent only for the lost sheep of the people of Israel. Still, the woman persisted, falling at Jesus' feet. Jesus, unrelenting, then told her it wasn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs. Still, the woman persisted. Even the dogs eat the leftovers that fall from their master's table, she told him. Finally, Jesus, what in modern parlance we would call an inclusive Jesus, said, "You are a woman of great faith. What you want will be done for you." We Catholic women and our church are still living through the early part of the parable. We are asking. Our church is saying not a word, while others among us insist that we be silenced. There is still a long way to go. There is insult and discouragement to bear, but we are women of great faith. We will persist. It will be done for us. It will be done for our church. That's why we choose to stay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice, for very inspirational words. It took me a minute to go on from there. That was excellent. Our first panelist this evening is Professor Shawn Copeland. Professor Copeland is an associate professor of systematic theology at Boston College and an adjunct associate professor of systematic theology and associate director of the master's program in pastoral theology at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University of Louisiana. And I know Professor Copeland has been having quite a difficult time in recent weeks dealing with her colleagues there, so a special mention of that, Shawn. Professor Copeland actually received her PhD in systematic theology from right here at Boston College. Her academic research and publications include the areas of theological and philosophical anthropology, political theology and philosophy, and embodiment, with special attention to gender and race. Shawn Copeland is a former president of the Catholic Theological Society of America and is the convener of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium. We are very honored to have Professor Copeland here with us this evening, and I ask you to join me in welcoming her.
Thank you very much. I want to move a bit now from staying to being. That is, being church. As a Roman Catholic theologian, my contribution this evening stands as a very modest effort in the service of a very complex historical, social, cultural, and theological problematic. And that is the challenge of being church. Uppermost in my mind and in my heart is the relation of who we are as church to the mission of Jesus of Nazareth. As his disciples, we have been granted, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, both a share in and a responsibility to press forward his vision of the reign of God and to bear a message of salvation intended for all. Theologically and practically, we must address issues of religious, legal, and financial accountability, as well as ecclesial governance. But if we give no thought to the mission of Jesus, then the very urgent concerns that bring us here this evening ring hollow. And we are in danger of replicating that image of church that too many children, women, and men experience as exclusive, arrogant, and neglectful. So in order to help us think a bit about ourselves as church, I simply want to set out for our consideration three very large sets of issues. The first is history and reform. The second, personal, communal, and social transformation. The third, the sacramental nature of the church. So first, history and reform. Most of us still live off of the legacy of the Second Vatican Council, but it may be helpful to situate that event within the larger history of the Church, for doing so will remind us that we are not the first to face internal problems or crises. The First Vatican Council, which opened December 9, 1869, and closed October 20, 1870, provides a retrospective starting point. Indeed, the First Vatican Council may be viewed as the culmination of the institutional church's wrestling for more than 350 years with an array of religious, social, and intellectual movements, including the Protestant Reformation, the French Revolution, rationalism, the Enlightenment, materialism, modernism, and the loss of the Papal States. If the signs of those times implied even modest institutional engagement in social and political change and rethinking philosophical and theological positions, the rejoinder of the First Vatican Council served to reinforce behavioral compliance through preparatory work on a code of canon law and intellectual submission through the declaration of papal infallibility. Set against this backdrop of 350 years of reactionary responses to innovation, Perhaps the Second Vatican Council may well prove to be an anomaly, more the exception than the rule. In other words, the reforms of the Council pushed against the deep grain of changelessness and intransigence, of surety and certitude. But the reforms of the Council first met with dissent, then opposition, and now in our own time, reinterpretation. The ingrained tendency to restrain and repress the charismatic can be seen in the steady recentralization of the institutional church over the past 25 years. Second, I want to speak about personal, communal, and social transformation. The Second Vatican Council reminded us that Roman Catholic Christianity is above all a way of following Jesus of Nazareth and being faithful to his mission. It is not primarily about rules and regulations, doctrines and dogmas, laws and commands. The Council sketched out for us a new and radical vision of Christian life. God was neither bound by nor circumscribed by law, but manifest in the dazzling parabolic logic of love. Dead ends and locked doors were broken open by the power of the Holy Spirit. The church was and is for the mission of the God of Jesus. It is not an end in itself. And indeed, the church was and is the whole people of God. Fidelity to Jesus and his mission, then, requires real personal and communal transformation at intellectual, religious, and moral levels. Righteous indignation and anger are necessary, but never enough. Those of us who want to be church need to fortify ourselves with prayer, the serious study of Scripture, theology, and history, and with disciplines of fasting and self-denial. Nor can we afford to dissolve into narcissism and self-pity. To repeat, other women and men throughout history have met similar challenges. Our personal and communal response to the call to holiness, then, must result in concrete transformation in the society in which we live. We are called to a creative solidarity and collaboration that transgresses borders of gender, race, class, and culture in order to heal divisions and create new possibilities for human and humane living. Finally, the sacramental nature of the church. Last October 2004, Pope John Paul II opened the year of the Eucharist, which is scheduled to close next month. Given the rapidly increasing attrition of active clergy through death, illness, laicization, and forcible juridical removal from the priesthood, how ironic and how painful that in this year of the Eucharist, we face a sacramental famine. Given this looming sacramental crisis, resistance to the ordination of married clergy and women seems theologically to accord primacy to gender and the discipline of celibacy over the responsibility to mediate the relationship between God and God's people. It appears that continued preference for celibate male clergy undermines the unique and precious sacramental nature of our church. Rather than focus on the rights of women or men to ordination, and no man and no woman possesses that right, we might consider the rights of God. If the Roman Catholic Church is to remain a church oriented and shaped by mystery, word, and sacrament, does such a refusal to provide an adequate number of priests not impinge upon the right of God to be present among us? Does this not encroach upon the expressed desire of God to love us and to feed us with God's own self? If we are to remain a sacramental church, does not such refusal deny God worship and honor? Who then shall baptize us? Who then shall make God present among us in bread and in wine? Who shall mediate God's compassionate and forgiving grace to us? Who in God's name shall bless and sanctify our marriages? Who shall anoint and bless us as we begin the final journey of death? At this time in our church, many of us feel as if we are in a dry and deserted place, a spiritual and religious wilderness. Hope and courage will sustain us. Hope calls for hard work, creativity, perseverance, and love. Courage supports us as we take up and carry the cross that comes to us in daily life. Be not afraid. God is with us. And even if we are abandoned and forgotten by priests and bishops, women and men of substance or influence, and such abandonment typifies the African American Catholic experience, this abandonment by priests and bishops and people of influence. If we are humbly faithful to the gospel and to the dictates of conscience and to the call to Christian community, then God will be with us to the very end.
More profoundly inspirational words. Thank you very, very much. Our second panelist, Megan Doherty, is a recent graduate of Boston College. In fact, a very recent graduate of Boston College, class of 2005. Megan majored in English and theology while participating in on-campus activities, and wait till you hear this list, such as Emerging Leaders Program, For Boston, Loyola Volunteers, Christian Living Communities, the Quality of Student Life Committee, Appalachia Service Project, and the Easter Service Retreat in Tijuana, Mexico, just to name a few, right, Megan? Just a few. Megan also broadened her horizons beyond the BC community here in beautiful Chestnut Hill and actually studied contemporary Catholic ethics, at Gregorian Institute in Rome and participated in a bioethics conference in Germany summer before last. Megan was admitted into the 5-year BA/MA program, and after graduating cum laude last May, is now completing her master's degree in theology here at Boston College. And we're very delighted to have Megan here with us. Many of us had the privilege of reading a paper that Megan had written for one of her classes, and it was as a result of that paper that actually was entitled, Why Not Me, if I recall, that really inspired us to think we had a fabulous student with us who would share some really powerful thoughts from a slightly younger perspective. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you for having me very much. I was also raised in a Catholic family, which sometimes I think is the best blessing and the worst curse that you can be afforded as a child, because somehow Catholicism gets taught to children in a really absolutist kind of way, like right and wrong and black and white, and this is the way it's always been and this is the way it's always going to be, even though that's pretty much completely wrong. But somehow the rules of Catholicism somehow get intertwined with like house rules, like rules for life, and you don't realize that you can question things like that. It's things like, do not take the Lord's name in vain. If you spill something, wipe it up. Don't hit your sister. Don't lie. Don't steal, and make your bed in the morning. Like, that's how you learn Catholicism. And I kind of think that it's not until you leave the physical structure of your house and you go somewhere else that you kind of start to parcel out what are real rules that you have to live by and what isn't exactly. I know that even today, if I went to take a tag off a piece of clothing with my teeth, I can immediately hear my mother's voice in the back of my head saying, don't do that. And it was kind of like that when I came here and I started to be like, why is it that women aren't priests? It's like that little voice in the back of your head, like a little church voice saying, like, don't think that. Like, that's the way it's always been. Case closed, don't talk about things like that. And I think that's part of the struggle that it is to be Catholic. And I think it's a struggle for everybody, and I would hope that it would be, if for no other reason than something mortal and something man-made. Any religion isn't going to encompass God. It can't. It can't possibly encompass everything that's immortal. So I think if you're in a genuine search for God, I would hope that you're going to kind of bump into anything that has been made by humans. I think it's very, very lucky for me that when I left my home, I came here to my new Boston College home, not to be like the poster child or anything, but I really think that I have the Jesuits to thank for the fact that I am Catholic today and probably will be forever. the Catholic feeling on campus is, to me, one that calls for an end of suffering of your neighbor, be it in your dorm or be it in El Salvador. I think what it means to be Catholic here at BC is a recognition that you are so loved by God, and that kind of gratitude and wanting to take that love and bring it to people who maybe are told by the world that you aren't loved. And that's kind of what it has meant to me to be Catholic, as far as I've learned from my wonderful Jesuit teachers. Specifically, that kind of community service program, I was very affected by Pulse, which is a philosophy theology course, full-year course with 10 hours of community service every week. And through that program, I volunteered at Casa Marina Vazquez, which is a battered women's shelter, and they have a wonderful domestic violence training program that all the employees and volunteers have to go through before you can step foot into a shelter. And I learned an enormous amount from that training program. And it was just so challenging to me, I guess, to think what kind of society have we created that a woman can think she deserves to be beaten and that a man can think it's his right to be his wife. And that's kind of the lens that I started to see the Catholic faith through. And I started to wonder, what are we doing in terms of helping free these women? How are we helping women out of oppression? And what kind of ways are we keeping women oppressed? Even little things, like the kind of language that we use, or the Bible readings that are in the lectionary that are being preached on Sunday. And of course, the biggest being female ordination. What's the message that you send when you say we don't ordain women? Is that something that's freeing them? Is that something that's giving them the message that they are worthy, that they are just as good? I genuinely feel that women are being oppressed in the Catholic Church, and my feeling on oppression is that if you see oppression going on, if you see people being mistreated, you don't leave and go somewhere where people are nicer to each other. You stay and you fight until the end of the oppression. Being Catholic is all about the preferential option for the poor. It's about being a voice for the voiceless, and I think the Catholic women's voice isn't really being heard, and that we need to be that voice for ourselves and for each other. So I guess I'm saying that I stay so I can change it, but I also mostly stay because it works for me, because I really like being Catholic, and I think it has a lot to do with Ignatian spirituality, which you just kind of seeps into your skin when you're here somehow. St. Mary's is a beautiful chapel, and really any Catholic church that I walk into, I just feel different. I like everything about it. I like the smell, I like the candles, I like the saints, I like the kneeling. I love the Eucharist. I'm Catholic. And I think people think about leaving the church, and people are really critical of the church when they focus on things like female ordination and when they focus on birth control and abortion and homosexuality. And that's not really what it means to be Catholic. Those things are like a tiny, itty-bitty little piece of what Catholic faith is. And it's that beautiful faith life that keeps me in the church. And that's what gives me hope, that I feel women's role in the church will change, because I don't think they can stop it from changing. People always say to me, why do you bother? It's a waste of your time. The church will never change. And my response is it has to change. I think as long as women are going to Mass with passionate preachers, and I think as long as women are falling in love with Jesus, and as long as they're letting God's love radically change them from the inside out, I don't think they can stop it from changing. I think that the Roman Catholic Church isn't patriarchy and hierarchy, and I don't think it's Pope Benedict's church. I think that's kind of the shell within which we are the church. Just on Monday, I was in a class with Professor Kilcoyne, and he said that parishes are the building blocks of the church. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think that sometimes when you think about it, like the Pope and Rome and the Vatican, you're like, all right, well, that's unchangeable. But if you think about it in terms of parishes, like, my mom is like a big deal at her parish, and she's like in the rosary, you know what I mean? Like, it's so easy to like make a difference in your parish. That's like so much more doable, but I think it's a matter of stopping that voice in the back of your head that says, don't rip the tag off. It's like that church voice that says, like, don't think about it, don't try and change it, and instead listening to the Spirit as it moves inside you. I think it's a matter of taking on priestly roles, and I mean, you can't consecrate bread and wine, unfortunately, yet, but it's not like that's all priests do. They don't just kind of like in a back room somewhere consecrate and then ship it out somewhere. It's all about ministry, and I think we can minister, and I think we need to do more of that and not let ourselves be stopped by whoever tells us to stop. And I think I read a book about the Midwest and how instead of closing parishes out there, as we are doing here, they have female pastors, and they have a woman who runs the whole parish, and then they have like a little guy who drives around and hands out the Eucharist. But there's a woman who like actually runs the whole parish, and like, why aren't we doing that here? And I think we could be doing that here. That's what I'm saying, because I think change will come, but it has to come from us. Tomorrow's my birthday, and I would love nothing more for Pope Benedict to wake up tomorrow and say, gee whiz, let's ordain women. It'd be like the best birthday present in the world. I just set myself up for a really bad birthday. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I don't think they can stop it from happening so long as there are passionate women and women who are strong enough to shut off that little voice that they were told in that like right, wrong, black, white kind of way and listen instead to the Spirit, because I have great hope that nothing we do can stop the Spirit in the world.
The powerful voice of the youth. They can't stop it from changing. That's a very great line. Thank you very much, Megan. Our final panelist this evening is Kathleen Power. Kathleen is Vice President of Services for Avid Technology, the leader in providing solutions that address the creative processes in film, television, broadcast, audio, and 3D animation industries. Prior to Avid, Kathleen held positions at Hewlett-Packard Vice President of Services, Targeted Service Global Accounts, North American Global Accounts, many very senior positions. Kathleen graduated from BC's Lynch School of Education in 1972 and earned her master's degree in education at Harvard University. Kathy, also I should mention, is a member of the Council for Women of Boston College, and we're delighted to have her here with us this evening. So join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And I will say, as a disclaimer before I begin, that I just got off a red eye this morning from San Francisco, so if I start to fade away, please clap, and at least I'll feel that I did a good job. I have to begin first by saying I'm so impressed by having so many people here this evening. It's such a statement to your commitment and obviously to this issue. I'll begin by really posing the question to you that was asked of me. If you were here in this seat for the next 10 minutes, what would you share with this audience around why you stay? It's really an important question. I'm sure that many of you have probably asked that of yourself already, or have spoken with a friend or a loved one around this topic, but I really challenge you to think about that and really hold that thought as we go through this evening and come back to it at the end of my short speech with you. Fundamentally, like all of you, I grew up as a Catholic, in a Catholic family. My education was exclusively in Catholic schools, from kindergarten all the way through Boston College. Virtually everyone I knew was a Catholic. It was just a part of my life. It was the fabric of my life. It was who I was. And I took that Catholic experience with me as I grew up and left Boston College and went on to all the many roles that I play every day, just as I'm sure you do. The role of being a mother. I have 2 daughters and a son. The role of being a wife. The role of being a sister. The role of being a friend. But also the role, which consumes a great deal of my time on a weekly basis, of being a business executive. So I've been a business executive for almost 20 years now in very large organizations, in companies that range from $1 billion to $80 billion, substantial organizations. And I understand those organizations very well. I understand organizations. I understand how they work. I've managed thousands of people over the years, and I've integrated tens of thousands of people in mergers, which is a really painful thing to have to do. At the end of the day, you can't lose sight when you're going through that of the individuals that you're impacting, of their own personal identity, of the families that you're impacting, of their careers. And I take all of that very seriously. I'm responsible and accountable for all of that. I'm expected by my corporation to be a leader, and my people expect me to be a leader. Throughout the years, I've had to fire people for unethical behavior, and I've had to defend people in front of a battery of lawyers on occasion. On one occasion, there were 7 lawyers against Kathy, defending the right of an employee who did not do what they were accused of and should not have been terminated. I've been responsible throughout my career primarily for transforming organizations. Have Kathy do this. Kathy will do this. And I do that, and I enjoy it, but it's tough work. And through all of my business experience, I bring my Catholic experience into those decisions. I can't leave it aside. It is, as I said, a part of who I am, a part of the fabric of my life. It's very important. So when the crises occurred in the church, I really reeled from those. Those struck at every fiber in that fabric. On an individual basis, as a wife, let me tell you, I had countless conversations with my husband who would say to me, "You're really being dramatic about this. It's only 1 or 2 people. It'll be over in a while." When it came to my position in a corporation as an executive, as I said to you, I take my leadership, my responsibility, the work, the authority that I'm given for my employees and for my corporation very seriously. And I had to ask myself, how could this happen? How could this be allowed to happen? And then, the most challenging of all, being a mother. Having my children say to me, "What does this mean? How did this happen? Where do we go from here as a Catholic family?" And then getting the big one from my daughter who said to me, "And you, so what about you? A woman who has struggled all these years, who's been challenged in a very competitive environment, who's achieved a lot, who's been very successful against all kinds of odds. What do you perceive your role in the church? And what about me? What about me in the future?" So needless to say, I looked around to see where the Calvary was, and it wasn't there to rescue me. I was on my own. And I'm sure many of you have been there, have been in the same place as I've been. And so I looked around and I said, where do I get my strength from? Well, I think in times like that, we all turn to God, and we hope that there's going to be some guidance and solace that we receive. And then we turn to our human friends, the people that we deal with every day, the people that we trust. And we talk to these folks and try to get that strength that we need to sort this all out. And my strength came from a very, very unsuspecting source. I went to visit my sister, who lives in the French countryside. She has a farm there. And I went for a walk one day with my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law was a vice president. He was an executive at IBM. And his role for 3 years was to be the vice president of business ethics and business practices. He's a very smart man. He's also Jewish. He's also the child of the Holocaust, who was entrusted by his parents to a Catholic family and left hidden in a barn for over 2 years while his family fled. His experience with Catholics, with people of the Catholic religion, was very compelling to me. As we walked along, he said to me, "You know, Kathy, all of my life, I've dealt with Catholics. I even married one. And I'll tell you something, my Catholic experience is people that follow a loving God, a loving Jesus. They are people of goodness. They are people that like to do the right thing. They believe in doing the right thing." That's what I think of when I think of Catholics and the Catholic Church. And he's Jewish. "I'm not of your faith," he said, "but there's no religion in which I see people of such goodness." Just his perspective. And that resonated with me. That goodness, doing the right thing, being ethical. Again, that's the fabric of who I always wanted to be. I don't always make the grade, but I try. It's who I am. It's what I always want to be. But then he said, oh, by the way, the Catholic Church, the human organization, must change. So I thought about that, kind of dismissed it at the time, and then Kathleen came along and asked me to serve this evening, to answer this question. And I thought about it again, and it struck me right between the eyes. And I said to myself, you know, the question for me is not, why do I stay? That's really not the question for me. The question for me, and I know from this illustrious panel that it may seem simplistic, but for me it really was striking. It struck at the core of who I am, and it was, do I really believe in this organization? Do I believe in the organized church? Now, organizations in crisis present probably the best time for change, the most powerful opportunity to make an organization stronger. But it takes everyone in the organization to internalize that that change is needed and that it's positive and that the outcome of that will be a more united, stronger organization. And again, I'm speaking about everything from an organizational perspective. So I started to think about that, and I said to myself, Kathy, if in fact you believe that the organization today is what it should be, what it could be, then you can just go on the way you've been. And that's just going to be fine. And there are a lot of people that choose to do that. They say it's okay, and they go on the way it is. But if you feel that the church is not, from an organizational perspective, what it should be or what it could be, then you as a leader, as a person that becomes accountable and responsible, have got to really look it in the face and say, do I leave or do I stay? And if I stay, then I'm accountable to be part of the change. So now, because I'm a business person, and I'm practical, and I live by business objectives, I created an action plan for myself. And of course, I'm going to achieve it and get a raise. I've learned from 20 years how to do that. My first action is to continue the dialogue with my children, my husband, and my friends. To keep on asking them, as I began tonight with you, why do you stay? Because only by keeping that dialogue alive and vital can we really continue to have that open conversation with each other. Because I'll be honest with you, if I don't do that, I may lose at least one of my children, if not more, from the church. So I need to keep that dialogue open, if for no other reason than also to understand what their perceptions are. Because we all come at this from a different perception. And until we really understand where someone's coming from, it's difficult for us to have a fruitful conversation with them. So that's the first action, and I've already begun that. Had that with my husband this Saturday at Starbucks, and it was very entertaining. The second one is really to take a look and find out, and I have already, quite frankly, found a place where I can worship, where Meg would say, all souls are equal. And I found that congregation, and I'm going to tell you, it wasn't easy, but I found that congregation of people that really do believe that all souls are equal. And so consequently, I can go there and be at peace. But what about that third challenge, which is the biggest one of all, and that is making a decision about whether to stay or go. Now, a lot of people just aren't going to really take a look at that, but I'm going to share with you that that really is the challenge for me. I've gone beyond, as I said, why do I stay? I have to ask myself the question, am I going to leave or am I going to be part of the change? Because if I'm going to stay, then I am accountable and responsible to make that decision. So I have to find a structure, a framework in which I can be part of that change. Change may not happen in my lifetime. Change is difficult. It takes a long time. It takes patience. It takes tenacity, persistence. It takes courage. It also takes passion and it takes energy. But it may be the biggest challenge that we here in this room have in front of us, and maybe the most important one for the rest of our lives. So I'm going to leave you this evening asking yourself again, asking that you ask yourself that question, why do you stay? But then maybe going to the next question, which is, if I'm going to stay, does the organization need to change? And if it's going to change, then what role do I play, as small as it might be, in making that change happen for all people within the Christian community? And yes, it may be beyond your lifetime, but it has to start now, and it has to start with all of us, or it'll never happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that challenge to all of us, Kathy, to be part of the change and play a role. I too like the action plan approach. So maybe half of the audience will leave the room with an action plan on how they are part of the change. Tremendous panel, thank you, and obviously thank you, Alice. Actually, we're going to start on questions. Please fill out your cards, send your questions to the end of the aisle, and we'll take as many as we can. Actually, the very first question we have really keys directly from what Kathy just said. Maybe we'll give you a breather, Kathy, and toss it to someone else. But the question is, shouldn't we now move the questions from why we choose to stay to how we might stay? Isn't it not time for actions that will force the requisite dialogue? And perhaps one of our panelists could talk about the kinds of actions. Alice, would you like to try that one first? So the question is all about the requisite actions that will force the requisite dialogue, and what are we doing about our staying with the church?
It's sort of dangerous to ask a fiction writer to talk about action. I can imagine all kinds of actions and outcomes. Reality I have a little bit more trouble with. I was saying before we came out this evening that really in a very non-methodical, gossipy, casual way, mostly at carpool line, picking up my 7th grader, I've been telling women in our parish that I was coming here and that this was the question we were discussing. And I was shocked and delighted by their response. Suddenly, I was getting emails from them when I got home. Make sure they talk about this, and make sure they talk about that, and make sure the role of women in the New Testament comes up, and make sure that they understand. I mean, it was just this outpouring. So obviously, dialogue and tapping that and having an opportunity for women to unload. But where we go from there, I think is probably something that I'm going to toss to the rest of you as far as actions within the living church.
Action plans.
Delegate.
Kathy's already said she has an action plan, so.
Well, I think from my perspective, where you go from here is really a very personal thing. As I mentioned earlier, it's like having a dialogue with my children. It really depends on where you're coming from at this point in time. And I think it's really important for you to really make that assessment. And I think that really is the next step in this whole process of change and healing, is to really understand today where you are and where the people that you love around you are in this whole process, because it's not something that one person can do alone. It's something that you need to take a friend or a loved one with you on this journey. So I think the first thing I would suggest to you is just really ask yourself that question again if you were up here. You know, what would you answer in terms of why you stay? And then I really would take a look at where you are and what you feel you need to do personally, very simply, very simple steps that you feel you need to take to really secure yourself within your religion and look and see if there are different groups out there that you can start to work with in a positive way to start to bring change about. That's what I would do, and that's what I'm going to do.
Maybe we'll move on to another question. Maybe, Sean, I would ask you to address this one. The question is, or the statement starts, "We are American Catholics. Will our strong belief in democracy help change our church?" With a little historic perspective, maybe?
Well, the American bishops had a very hard time at the First Vatican Council. And I was talking with a historian friend of mine about this, and the only 2 dissenting votes came from Americans who somehow didn't get the message that the other American bishops were leaving. And in fact, the Archbishop of St. Louis traveled around Europe for 2 years trying to avoid being pressed into signing onto the document on papal infallibility. Our traditions of democracy are important to us because they give us a sense of all of us coming to the table, offering a position, a viewpoint, a concern. But I suspect, just based on Kathleen's description of how organizations function, there's also something that we don't attend to well, and that's preparation for democracy. In other words, you have to work well in your organization. You have to be prepared to participate. Mm-hmm. And I think we're not always prepared to participate. What I think, this is following up really on the last question, is that, and I'll just say quickly this, that I tried to suggest some things that we could be doing, that we could be doing right now to bring about change. Because the change probably can't happen, and I don't know this, but my hunch is that it can't happen in a vacuum. I can't imagine, I can imagine something new, but not something so new that it doesn't come from somewhere that we are already right now. So some form of preparation is really crucial. I'm really suspicious of consistently tagging ourselves as American Catholics. My theological position is always to change my position. And so there's a certain moment of contrariness here. Since American Catholicism is the very group of people who abandoned African American Catholics historically. So I'm just a little bit suspicious. But I'm equally suspicious of the people who befriended African American Catholics, that is the Vatican, insofar as they were assuming to take responsibility for people's souls, if you like. So I think our traditions are very important to us as a people. I don't know that we're a nation. We're certainly a country. If we were a nation, we'd know how to respond to Hurricane Katrina better. But I'm not talking about just about things. I'm talking about attitudes. So I think there's a way in which we need some forms of preparation for our own ongoing development, both in terms of being the church that we are or that we're coming to be, that we're discovering, and being in the kind of country that we live in as well.
Move on. Actually, Megan, I might ask you to take this one, and this is not age discrimination here, but the question is, what would you say to a young woman or young women who don't question why they stay with the church? They are just fine with the way things are.
I don't know any of those women, but if I were to encounter one,
That was great.
I've we'd have to have a very long conversation, I think, about how she sees herself in the world and how she sees herself in relation to the opposite gender. And I don't know, maybe a little bit of biology. I'm not sure. I guess it would have to come from almost a human rights perspective, and I think one of the things we've kind of been talking about is hope and despair, and one of my greatest sources of hope is my colleagues and my friends who feel as passionately as I do. And the flip side of that is that my greatest source of despair is when I speak with someone of my age, raised entirely in a time period that's striving for gender equality, like it's not a new concept, and someone with a college level education who thinks women shouldn't be priests. Because it's so inconceivable to me how in this day and age, with that much education, it's not just evident to you. So, I mean, I guess without trying to be judgmental of her views, I guess I would try and understand where she was coming from, in that she feels that she, as a girl, if she had a brother, that he could be ordained and she couldn't, despite the fact that they have the same DNA and same education and same parents, and just because she's a girl, she can't do it.
Great perspective. This question was specifically addressed to you, Alice, so I'll follow the audience's request. And it follows on something that you talked about quite a bit in your remarks. And the question is, what do you think the impact of benign tolerance is on children in particular? It relates a little to what Megan was just answering as well. The impact of benign tolerance on children.
I guess picking up on Megan's idea of hope and despair, the impact we might hope is that children, when they rebel against us who are benignly tolerant, will change the church. Despair is children will model our benign tolerance, and the church will remain as it's been. I've been delighted in seeing among my daughter's friends, my daughter is now 17 and a senior at an all-girl Catholic high school that was not of her choosing, was of her mother's choosing. But I've been delighted in overhearing the conversation. I guess this sort of also goes along with what Megan is saying. These girls are not content with the church as it is, nor are they swept away by their mother's feminist arguments either. It's more of course it has to change. Everybody knows that, and after you old people are all gone, we'll take care of it. So as I say, I think the impact can be to the benefit of all of us. If we are not going to give up our benign tolerance, then you can bet our teenagers will.
One other comment along those lines, though, that I think is important is that more and more young women have the opportunity to participate in different activities, different opportunities. You look at the stats for medical school and law school, and you look at the enrollments. So there's more opportunity for women, young women, to participate than ever before, and this is a very, very important population. I think the challenge that we have, again, is to create for these young women a structure and a framework for them, or else they'll just be out there on their own, and you'll never be able to really give them that guidance or that structure that will enable them to really bring to fruition all of the capabilities that they have. So I think that as women, that's a challenge that we have in working in the church, is to somehow, again, force that structure, build that structure and that framework, and encourage young women and young men, obviously, to participate in this change. And I think, as Megan said, there's one thing that is important. Not everyone's going to want to change. Not everyone's going to see there is a need to change. There may be people here this evening that don't see that there's a need to change. And again, in the spirit of organizational design and organizational transformation, not everyone comes on the journey. There are people that just can't internalize, they can't accept it, they don't see it, they don't want to see it. And you know what? That's okay. There are lots of people that do. And so the spirit here is to try to create a structure that will allow those people that do to have the ability to bring that to fruition. So I think that's our challenge.
Actually, this next question follows on perfectly, and I'm going to throw it out to the whole panel, whoever would like to comment. Question goes, why are men, our fathers, brothers, husbands, and sons, not asking for this kind of change? What can we do to help them see that it is their issue as well? Let's keep it nice. Just kidding. Who would like to take that one first?
Well, most males I have encountered have been for it, and if they weren't before we spoke, they are now. Our mod was the fighting grounds for such a conversation. But I agree that they're a very important part of the conversation because they do make up the other half of the population. And I think maybe more people are for it than have thought about it or have articulated. And I think it's always surprising to me when I meet a priest who's in favor of female ordination, because I just kind of feel like you're supposed to be the church, and that's not what the church says. But more and more, the more people I talk to do in fact feel that way and are decently passionate. In fact, a friend of mine who's doing the 5th year program wrote his entire senior thesis on female ordination. So I think it is there, and I think it's becoming more common as it becomes kind of almost a human rights issue and a gender equality issue that males are interested, I think.
I think the important thing, too, is that we have to make it clear that women don't want this for us. We want it for the good of the church, which means all of us, male and female. We will be a better church. And I think if we couch it in terms of you've got it and we want some of what you've got so that we can wear those great hats. We will never get anywhere. We will be dismissed as, it's a woman thing, just yes them to death, and then close the door, turn on the game, But it is that sense the church is in crisis. The church is in trouble. The church needs this. We all need this. We will indeed be a better church. And also, it's not that big a deal, It's not really. The walls won't crack, The basilica will still be there. It's only going to take one generation. I guess that's what sort of inspires me, the summers that I've spent at Sewanee and going back to and thinking, I've seen infants that have been baptized by a woman, now toddlers and going school age. It's not a question for them. Male, female, it's not a question for them. They're a priest. It's done. One generation, it's done. It's not that hard, but it's for all of us, and I think that's the distinction. It's not a woman's issue. It would be lovely, it's lovely that you're all here. It would be lovely if there were as many men here as well. And that's the news we have to get out. It's not about us. It's not about women. It's about the good of the whole church.
Thank you, Alice. This next question is a little long, so bear with me. It starts by saying, education is empowering. It teaches us to ask potent, insightful questions such as this evening. Education also costs money. Where does that leave poor women who desire a theological education? Education for men becoming priests and deacons is made readily available, among other benefits. That's male privilege. How do we change this in our church? Sean, I see you enthusiastically interested. You want to take
Well, I think this is the issue about how do we find opportunities for creative solidarity. How is it that in our parishes that we can't find ways to support women in school? I think my Protestant colleagues who've come through graduate programs have frequently been funded by churches, their own home churches. And that's nothing unusual. It's nothing so strange that people might not do that. So it seems to me that it's redesigning our priorities. It's redesigning our priorities. It's also, I guess you could say, if and I believe this, that the ordination of those who are called and who have their calls tested is for the good of the whole church. Then there's a way in which in justice we need to think about how we allocate our resources in a very different sort of way. Not to strip down and get rid of all sorts of things that might be valuable and important, but we could really think very carefully and critically about the way we allocate resources. And for people for whom their presence has not really been part and parcel of the daily fabric of life in higher education, particularly higher theological education, it would be important, I would think.
Here's an interesting follow-on. It asks, if women simply stopped going to church, would that force the church to change?
No. No.
I don't think anyone thinks the answer is yes, no.
No. No.
You know, that's an interesting question, though, because even though the answer is no, I would assume, I think that there are forces that we're not counting on today that will influence this change over time. So it's not just going to be all of us, men and women alike, that are going to bring this change within the Catholic Church to fruition. Just as in any kind of other scenario that you can think of, whether you're looking at something on a global scale, whether you're looking at changes that are happening within business organizations, whatever it is, there are many factors that come to bear. So I think that in addition to all of us participating in the change, there are going to be other factors that are going to, over time, whether they're economic factors, whether they are the factors of, you know, having clergy available for all of us, that are going to start to drive that, you know, into motion.
I don't know, though, a week-long boycott might not be a bad idea. If we all stay home for one, and I don't just mean Mass on Sunday, I mean the work that women do in the church. That might be a way to get some attention. I don't know that it would change anything, but they might notice us in our absence where they're not noticing us in our presence. I kind of like it.
I think we have a movement here. I'll do one last question. Our audience has been very patient, and this one actually is an interesting one with a global perspective. It says, if 3/4 of the Catholics are in third world countries, and this is the fastest growing Catholic segment, the Vatican has made it pretty clear that American unrest with the church doesn't concern them. How do we bring it to their attention and move forward? Money. Sean, anything to comment on there? I'm sorry to pick.
Sure, pick on the
Stop
theologians.
nodding your head.
I know a number of people in different parts of the world. I guess we might call living in Nigeria part of the third world, or living in Ghana part of the third world, or living in Belize part of the third world. But these are not simply American concerns for people who don't have the sacraments celebrated for them in their churches. It's not simply an American concern. We may be stepping up to the problem because we're feeling it most keenly right now. But it's not as if the present situation will simply resolve itself in 5 or 10 years here, and then suddenly things will just keep happening as they have been happening in other parts of the world. I think this is it's a universal problem in the church. And Megan's comments about women's perceptions of themselves tell us something about, let me put it this way, let us not underestimate the power and the creativity of women in the so-called third world. Let us not underestimate the women in South Africa who began the struggle against apartheid with their own resources and their own courage. Let's not underestimate the market women in Ghana who control that economy in a particular form, in a particular kind of way. Let's not underestimate people simply because they don't speak our language or they don't perhaps behave in the same way that we do. And I say we because we all can misperceive. We all can misperceive. Every teacher can misperceive. Every priest can misperceive. Every bishop can misperceive. Every father, every mother. You know. So I think there is a way in which it's not a trickle-down effect to other people, but the failure to recognize the humanity of the other half of humanity has an impact on the whole of humanity.
Very well.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I want to thank our panel and our keynote speaker immensely. I don't think we could have asked for broader or deeper thoughts and comments, and I can see that our audience appreciated it immensely. So thank you very, very much.